Dear friends and colleagues, a warm welcome from the European movement here in Brussels to the 10th edition of Talking Europe, a series of events organized in collaboration between the European movement and the European Commission, with the intention to have a chat with leading figures inside the Commission about some of the things that are the top of the agenda at the moment. Today, for this 10th incarnation of our events, we have the pleasure of having with us the Acting Director General of DG NEAR, Maciej Popowski, who will be joining us from his office in Brussels and will give us the opportunity to talk about enlargement, the relationship with Eastern partners, and many other things pertaining to one of the flagship policies of the European Union. Thank you very much for joining us on behalf of all our colleagues and our friends across Europe. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. And indeed, it's a great opportunity to present to you what DG NEAR does. You know that in the Commission we use a lot of acronyms, but the name of our DG is actually quite telling because we are dealing with countries that are near to Europe, meaning the candidate countries, the Western Balkans 6, and Turkey on the one hand, and then we also in charge of the European neighbourhood policy, the one that was formulated already 10 years ago and then revised in 2015, and covering Eastern Europe, so the 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership, and the Southern neighbourhood, which is the Mediterranean basin, so North Africa and the Middle East. We don't cover all the countries in the Middle East. The dividing line between DG NEAR and DG INTPA, so the old DG DevCo, is the border in the sand between Syria and Iraq. But that's just a piece of anecdote. So that's the framework we operate in. The enlargement policy is actually already well established, because it was established back in as a very solid framework based on a set of criteria in 1993 at the European Summit, as we used to call them these days, in Copenhagen. And actually those the so-called Copenhagen criteria are still the guiding principles of the enlargement process, even though the process, the methodology, the pace of enlargement has evolved. Of course, now we are still within the enlargement process that never stopped, but the dynamic is quite different than the dynamic of the Big Bang 2004 and 2007 enlargements that I experienced, so to speak, on the receiving end as a Polish diplomat. I will come back to the enlargement report. You may know that every year the Commission publishes an enlargement report that consists of communication with main messages and recommendations, and then a set of country reports on each and every of the candidates. But then on the just a few words on the neighbourhood policy. There again, the overarching framework is the European neighbourhood policy, but we have additional frameworks for the sub-regions. So for the East, for Eastern neighbours, we have Eastern Partnership that was launched in 2009. So again, an established policy of building a closer relationship with the countries east of Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia, Hungary, etc., that have different levels of ambition. 3 of them, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, have signed association agreements with the European Union, have signed deep and comprehensive free trade agreements with the European Union, so they have a clear European ambition. This is not something that all the member states of the European Union would agree to. So we are not talking about candidates for enlargement, but certainly countries that have an ambition to become closely associated with European policies and European programs, and also the trade integration with Europe is higher. The three other countries in the East are, again, very different. So on the one hand, you have Belarus. Well, Belarus is as far away as it can be from the European Union, not least because of the developments that occurred after the rigged elections of August 2020. So we don't even have a contractual relationship. Belarus was never able, nor willing, to conclude an association agreement with us. And then with Armenia and Azerbaijan, we have sui generis bilateral relationship because they don't have these European ambitions. They conduct, as they sometimes call it, a multi-vector foreign policy. Moving to the south, there it's a bit more, it's very diverse, clearly, but the framework we very often refer to is the Union for the Mediterranean, something that goes back to the so-called Barcelona process, launched back in 1995, but then it was formalized or institutionalized and became Union for the Mediterranean with a secretariat in Barcelona, the only regional organization for the south. Interestingly, it's the only organization bringing together member states, or some member states of the European Union, all member states of the European Union, some of the member states of the Balkans, all neighbors in North Africa and the Middle East, including Israel. So that's quite a unique combination. There, some countries are close and would like to maintain a very close relationship in political terms or trade terms with the European Union. A good example is Morocco. Some are a bit more distant, but all of them, we have a rich agenda because of the common challenges, like the effects of climate change, or what is on our mind, at least since 2015, migrations, or the migratory flows coming from the southern world and passing through North Africa and the Middle East. Then, of course, a lot of these countries have a very close trade relationship, also for historical reasons, which is the case between France and Tunisia, or Spain and Morocco. And then I didn't mention Turkey. Turkey is still a candidate country, even though for the last couple of years, the Turkish accession process has been at a standstill. That's also the conclusion of this year's enlargement report. Not much has changed. But again, it's a country with which we have a very close and very rich relationship at all levels, and in all areas of cooperation, from migration, security, counterterrorism, economic relationship. We are connected with Turkey through a customs union. That's in force since 1995. We have a lot of people-to-people contact. Turkey is participating in a number of European programs. So it's not an easy relationship. There's a lot of tension. In particular, when we look at the recent developments of the last few years, and I'm sure everybody has heard about offshore drillings in Eastern Mediterranean. That's a source of friction and tension with many neighbors, including our member states, Cyprus and Greece. Turkey is not recognizing Cyprus, as you know, as a member state of the EU, and Turkey is conducting a very assertive foreign policy by engaging in places like Syria or Libya. That is also very often a cause of tension and friction with us. So this is the broader framework. We are providing a lot of support to these countries through our specific instruments. The instrument for the pre-accession countries that includes Turkey is IPA, Instrument for Pre-Accession assistance. We are now on the third edition, so now we call it IPA 3. And there is a novelty in our toolbox under the current financial framework. This is the global instrument called NDICI, Neighbourhood Development International Cooperation Instrument, that we manage jointly with our friends from DG INTPA. Although within the bigger instrument of NDICI, there is a specific neighbourhood envelope that we keep for our countries, for country and regional programs. Maybe I'll say a few words, and I know that was on the mind of the organizers, about the latest enlargement report. This is something that's keeping us busy these days.
And then the remit you have is wide. The remit you have is very wide. I said the remit of this year is very wide, and we want to go through and look at the various of the relationships that you're responsible with. But perhaps, it would be useful if we could start with taking a look at the enlargement packets recently adopted in 2021. Would you like to elaborate a bit on the main features and its ambitions?
Yes, with pleasure. So let's start with the general statement that enlargement still matters, and we all are aware of the strategic importance of the Western Balkans. That has been stated time and again since the 2003 summit in Thessaloniki that confirmed this European perspective for the Balkans. But then, of course, the process has been rather slow. Of course, some of the countries in the region joined the European Union meanwhile. Slovenia in the first wave of enlargement of 2004, and then later in 2013, Croatia. But the process is not over. So, and as we are still convinced that the future of the Western Balkans is in the European Union, we are pursuing that policy. And President von der Leyen went on a major Western Balkans tour back in September with this message of support and encouragement to the region to demonstrate political commitment. That also came on. Was very clearly expressed by the EU leaders when they met just a little bit later on the 6th of October in Brdo in Slovenia. They met with the counterparts and once again underlined the European perspective, our commitment. And it's necessary for a number of reasons. First of all, because the enlargement process is rather slow, and we had some difficulties and some challenges. I'll come back to it. We see that there is a sense of disillusionment in the region, and we want to counter that negative perception. And also because we are not operating in the vacuum. We are the major partner of the countries. They all want to become members of the European Union. We are the closest trade and development partner of these countries. And still, in many countries in the region, there is still this perception that others can do more for them. Others being Russia or China or Turkey. But I think that the European offer that comes with a lot of strings attached, so it's not a free ride, is real and much more attractive in terms of, for the current and future delegations. We are not coming empty-handed. We are providing a lot of support for the countries in the region. That was also recalled in the enlargement package. Last year, go back to October 2020, when we published our enlargement report, it was also accompanied by a new initiative, namely an economic and investment plan for the Balkans that is based on a 9 billion euro budget, so 9 billion euros in grants that would then help leverage investment of up to 20 billion euros. And why did we do that? We wanted to set up a tool, a major vehicle to support economic recovery of the region that suffered, of course, as all the other countries in the world from COVID-19, but also a major financial economic tool that would help bridge the development gap between the countries in the Western Balkans and the EU. So that's the broader context of the enlargement report. This year's edition was interesting, unique, because it was for the first time that the report was based on the revised enlargement methodology that was adopted in 2020 by the Commission. And the revised enlargement methodology is based on 4 principles: more credibility, more predictability, more dynamism, and a stronger political steer by member states. So to add dynamism to the process and exploit synergies between negotiating chapters, you know that the whole acquis is divided in 30 plus chapters, we have decided to bring those chapters together in thematic clusters, like a cluster dealing with the green economy, for instance. Under the revised methodology, we have put even a greater focus on closely monitoring reforms in the fundamental areas, the fundamentals as we sometimes refer to them, which is the rule of law, independent judiciary, freedom of expression. We really need to further anchor them at the heart of the process, and sufficient progress needs to be achieved in the fundamental cluster before any other cluster can be opened. This approach is reflected in the reports, and that consumes a lot of time and energy, but we will certainly not let go of that principle. When we draft the reports, we always draw on a number of sources. Reports coming from the EU delegations in the region, from the governments themselves, from a number of international organizations like the World Bank or OSCE or NATO, and independent think tanks and institutes. We keep strong conditionality and merit-based elements in the reports, and we provide necessary incentives, meaning something that we sometimes refer to as a more for more principle. So already last year we witnessed a crisis, a delay in the adoption of a decision to open accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia, and that had a very negative impact on the region, added to this sense of frustration and disillusionment. Both countries have delivered on the necessary reforms and deserve to start the accession process, and this conclusion was repeated in this year's enlargement report. We made it crystal clear that they fulfilled the conditions for the opening of the talks. And so hopefully the intergovernmental conferences, so the kickoff, if you will, of the enlargement of the accession process will take place as soon as possible. We are still hoping for December. The package also recognizes the importance to move forward in the accession negotiations with Montenegro and Serbia. Montenegro is the only country that has opened all negotiating chapters. And with Serbia, we acknowledge the wish to open Cluster 3, which is competitiveness and inclusive growth, and Cluster 4, green agenda and sustainable connectivity. We believe both clusters are ready to be opened. And I think consensus is emerging among member states. I don't want to prejudge the ongoing discussion in the Council, but we really hope that these clusters could be opened in December. We also think, and it was clearly stated in the report, that it's time to deliver on visa liberalization with Kosovo. Kosovo is the only country that does not have the visa-free movement with the European Union, and has a negative impact on the Kosovars, in particular the young people. So what's going to happen? And I spoke about Turkey, so that unfortunately no progress has been achieved in terms of Turkish accession to the European Union. We saw a lot of backsliding in terms of democratic standards, human rights, freedom of expression. So it's a fact. and still Turkey remains a key partner for us, and this relationship will certainly continue in the future. So now what comes next is the member states are now discussing the findings of our report and are supposed to adopt conclusions. It's not straightforward. There is an ongoing discussion between Bulgaria and North Macedonia regarding issues of very often of historical nature, but it's about the status of the language of North Macedonia. It's about the interpretation of certain events in the past. It's a tense and difficult discussion, but of course, both countries need to come to an agreement, as you know, for any decision regarding the enlargement process. Unanimity rule applies, and we can certainly support, and we'll do that, and make sure that we can go ahead as soon as we can. But this is one of the challenges ahead of us. So we know that finding unanimity will not be easy, but we still really want to maintain an ambitious enlargement policy and to encourage, reassure the candidate countries that their future is in the European Union. I would stop here because I spoke.
Well, no, this was very useful indeed, and it provides an excellent background for some of the things we want to touch upon, especially with regards to the Western Balkans. You were quite honest and open about the challenges that the enlargement process there is facing, both because of the bilateral issues that you described between a member state and an accession country, but also because of some criticism that has been levied against other candidate countries. And some member states have raised concern about the rule of law, as well as other issues. How does that affect, you think, the fact that the enlargement process in the Western Balkans stalled? How does that affect public opinion and public support towards EU accession? And is this an opportunity for other actors, you mentioned Russia, China, Turkey, to step in and perhaps try to pull those countries into their sphere of influence?
One correction: I wouldn't say that the accession process is stalled. There's a lot of challenges, and it's not as quick as we would like it to be. But we are moving ahead slowly. So indeed, we had this fallout last year where the Council failed to reach conclusions, to agree on the conclusions, and we didn't manage to open accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, which was very unfortunate. So hopefully, we'll avoid that negative scenario this year. But of this lack of progress or the slow progress has had an impact on the perception of the European Union and on the way people perceive us. Still, the support for EU membership is relatively high in the region, and I have in front of me the latest so-called Balkan Barometer for 21, which is a specific public opinion poll that is being carried out at our request, and it shows that there was an increase in support for the EU membership across the region. So it went up from 56% in 2018 to 62% this year. But we also see a little bit of a negative trend in the sense that when asked about the chances of the country becoming a member of the European Union, there is more and more skepticism that would ever happen. And this is a worrying trend that we need to counter. And of course, we cannot make people change their mind only by giving them a lot of nice words. We also come with action. I mentioned the economic and investment plan, which is a real offer. The Prime Minister Edi Rama, who's a gifted speaker and a colorful personality, when he came to Brussels back in March, I think it was, he called it in the meeting of the Stabilization and Association Council. He called the European Economic and Investment Plan the only real stuff, because this is a plan based on ideas coming from the countries themselves. And its main aim is to help them recover from economic crisis, but also connect them with Europe and the European policies like the Green Deal, the digital transition, or the economic reforms we are carrying out. So this is something real. And then there is also a specific offer to the younger generation, and the number of Erasmus scholarship that we have, I think, tripled over the last few years, and many other opportunities, not least because we are faced with a real challenge, a negative phenomenon of brain drain. A lot of young, gifted, very well-educated people leave the region and go into the European Union, and we don't want it to continue because we don't want these countries to bleed out. So we have to be mindful. Of course, the others are present. We cannot prevent anybody from being active. But as I said before, I think that our offer is much more tangible and real, even though I have to say with all modesty that some of our partners, if not competitors, are much better at selling themselves or their offer in public, in the social media, than we are. So there is room for improvement.
I think in that sense, over there, the role of civil society is very important. There are very pro-European organizations on the ground in the region, not least the European movement, who are active advocates of EU members and always appreciate the support. And we've seen pressure on civil society in various countries in the areas, lack of funding, other factors. Is the European Commission cooperating at all? Because they are, as I said, potential allies and advertisers of the merits of European integration.
Absolutely. We do cooperate a lot, also in a more structured way. For instance, there are regular civil society forum meetings. That is part of the so-called Berlin process. It was a political process, a framework that was launched by the German Chancellor, Chancellor Merkel, back in if I'm not mistaken, 2015. So there are regular summit meetings, but in the run-up to every summit or in the margins of every summit, there is a civil society forum that's really interesting. And last time I attended, because that was the last real summit in person, it was in Poznan in Poland, and I have vivid memories of that discussion. I think that the civil society scene in the region is really vibrant. I mean, a lot of activists, people with bright minds, a lot of good ideas, and convinced Europeans. And we maintain close relationship. We also provide support through our specific civil society facility or through our partners with whom we work very closely, like the European Endowment for Democracy. And we also rely on input from civil society when we draft the enlargement reports. As I said, we are using a multitude of different sources to be as precise and as objective as possible.
Indeed, and that's very much appreciated, and that's something that we receive from our colleagues also. Even though it's sometimes better to support civil society directly, often the financial support might be channeled through the government or other avenues. But the message we receive always is that the support of the European Union is integral for the survival of civil society. And if I may also touch a bit on Turkey, you mentioned the complications there with the relationship and the fact that as a result, there hasn't been as much progress with a country that is a significant geopolitical partner. What is your estimation for the months and the years ahead? Do you foresee the creation of the conditions that can improve the relationship and enable the enlargement process to continue with Turkey?
That really depends on the Turkish government. There's still I don't have the latest figures for public support for Europe or the European Union in Turkey. I guess there are significant differences between the big cities and the countryside, but it's normal. It's not. It's quite a natural phenomenon. But it really depends on the Turkish government willingness to continue with necessary reforms to ensure space for civil liberties, to ensure compliance with human rights obligations, international human rights obligations. The fact that the accession process is stalled, this is not cast in stone. It's perfectly reversible if there is political will to engage. After the attempted coup of 2016, the EU and Turkey issued a joint statement, in a way setting out the agenda for the coming years. And on some issues we've made progress, and on some issues we did not make a lot of progress. For instance, on visa liberalization, Turkey has not complied with all the conditions that apply to all the countries worldwide to be granted visa liberalization. We were not able yet to start a serious conversation on the modernization of the customs union. This is something. This is a very interesting offer, and it's potentially advantageous for both European Union and Turkey because we are so closely connected. So the current customs union has been in place for the last 25 years or so. But of course, meanwhile, the single market evolved, and there are many areas that are not covered by the current customs union, or agriculture or services. So we prepared a mandate, but in order for us to be able to negotiate this mandate with the member states, or for the member states to agree to the mandate, the member states seek assurances that Turkey would comply with the provisions of the current customs union, for instance, ensure cooperation with all member states of the EU without any exception. An area which stands out where we've really made a lot of progress, and we really appreciate Turkey's role and Turkey's commitment, is migration and help to Syrian refugees. I'm sure everybody knows that for the last already 10 years, Turkey has been hosting a huge population of Syrian refugees, more than 4 million. Taking care of them, creating opportunities for them to have a quasi-normal life. And we've set up a support scheme called Facility for Refugees in Turkey, under which we've already disbursed close to 6 billion euros since 2016 to provide for education, health, social services, and basic income for those Syrian families living there. And that's going to continue. And by the way, the EU leaders, when they meet, they really discuss Turkey regularly because it is such a close partner and neighbor, and because our relationship is so multifaceted and so challenging.
Is there, you think, a risk that the Turkish government might decide to reject the prospect of EU membership and take a completely different route? You mentioned that in some cases the geopolitical interests of the two aren't aligned at the moment. That has caused quite a lot of friction with the EU as a whole and certain member states in particular. Do you think there is a risk that they, as I mentioned, leave the table and stop negotiations for accession?
Look, listening to the words of President Erdogan and the Turkish government is rather unlikely because they are really attached to the status of Turkey as a candidate country. The President has stated it at several occasions that their ambition is still to pursue the path to accession, even though they know that for the time being, not much, if anything, is happening. Frankly, I don't expect any rupture in the sense that the Turkish government or the Turkish president would simply decide to withdraw from the accession process, which is technically possible, but to my mind, rather unlikely.
If I may, I'll take a couple of questions. There's been, as ever, a lot of interest in our discussion, and one of our viewers would like to ask something related to the Western Balkans, especially whether there is any appetite to decouple the accession negotiations between Albania and North Macedonia, considering that Albania isn't facing the same kind of complication that North Macedonia is. What would you answer to that?
For the time being, we don't plan anything of that kind. And President von der Leyen was very clear when she was in the region that she does not accept the concept of decoupling. By the way, only 2 or 3 years ago, it was actually the other way around. So Albania was under a lot of criticism for not lack of reform, but not sufficient pace of judicial reforms, for instance, in the country, whereas North Macedonia was almost ready to go. Now, the problem or the issues with Bulgaria occurred, and now Albania is ready and has convinced all the member states that it should go ahead. So it's a very delicate moment, and we don't want to jump into any conclusions. So for the time being, we are on a parallel track with both North Macedonia and Albania.
One of the things that the EU is currently working on is, of course, the Conference on the Future of Europe, and these discussions are part of that process. These events feed into the wider debate. And of course, enlargement is one area that is being discussed. Unfortunately, representatives from the accession countries don't have a formal role in the Conference on the Future of Europe, but nevertheless, this deliberative process is looking at it. How do you think enlargement fits into the future of the European Union? Does it still remain a big part of our aspirations to grow our family of nations?
Well, it's still a policy of the European Union, the policy that's already enlargement has happened from day one. There was a little break since the creation of the communities, but then the first enlargement happened in 1973. So it's a while ago, and that continues until today. So I think it should be discussed by the Conference on the Future of Europe, and it is being discussed. The candidate countries have not been invited to participate formally along with the member states, but for instance, citizens and civil society organizations, of course, are free to participate in different discussion platforms, and actually do participate in different discussion platforms and present the contributions. And it's very good. I think it's something we should welcome, and I'm sure that with a little bit of goodwill, there will be other ways of associating the candidates in the work of the conference.
You mentioned previously the Eastern Partnership countries and the relationships that the EU is developing there. Could you take us a little bit through some of the work that the European Commission is doing in the context of the Eastern Partnership, perhaps especially keeping in mind some of the challenges that we're facing in that part of the EU's neighborhood?
Look, the beauty of the Eastern Partnership as a concept is and has always been that it's very pragmatic. We never overpromise, but sometimes we over-deliver. When you look at the developments of the last 10 years, we have dynamized this relationship. So we have regular meetings, regular exchanges, but also things that happen on the ground. We also put forward a set of ambitious economic and investment plans for each and every country in the East. That was these economic and investment plans were published in spring. I mean, we started with Moldova, but then a whole set of economic plans economic and investment plans were presented in June. And there we are following the similar logic as in the case of the Balkans. So we are going to work on their own ideas and try to connect them with our own policies and our own networks. So we are going to promote green transition. We are going to invest and support small and medium-sized enterprises. We are going to work on the concept of smart cities. We are going to help, that's also part of the green transition, transition out of coal to more sustainable energy production and consumption. But moreover, within the Eastern Partnership, we always focused on tangible results, something real for the people. So we started with the visa liberalization for a number of countries. Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, they all enjoy visa-free travel with the European Union, which is something real and something people appreciate a lot. We have increased number of Erasmus scholarships that are also funded by the European Union, and indeed, in that period now, as of 2021, through this new instrument, NDI-CI, and we are also developing regional concepts like for instance, this idea of lowering and at some point phasing out roaming charges among the Eastern Partnership countries themselves, something that we've piloted in the Balkans, and it's worked quite well. Also in terms of COVID response, I mean, the first phase was really emergency support, but then we really switched to this mid to long-term economic recovery programs that are now coming on stream, and I think it's quite promising. So see, we don't develop lofty visions and we don't set up big institutions, but we work on things that matter for the people.
And in many ways, that is very important, because obviously, enlargement or a relationship shouldn't be just an abstract concept. It should be quite specific. Is the situation currently in Ukraine and the conflict taking place there over the past few years having an effect on the relationship that the European Union is having with the country? And how are you navigating such complications?
Yes, it has as an impact, of course. The conflict in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea started back in 2014, and we are still, the country is still suffering consequences. Now the situation, the tension is rising again with the Russian military buildup in the east, which is quite worrying. It's not only our assessment, because we don't have any military presence on the ground, but it's also the assessment of the United States or the UK. The problem has always been that Russia has seen the Eastern Partnership as a divisive framework, whereas it's not directed against any partner. In fact, Russia could have joined if it had wished so. In the past, has never been the case, but it's just they still think in terms of spheres of interest. For them, the whole post-Soviet space is part of their own sphere of interest, which means that our visions clash, and we don't want to pursue this our policy. In a confrontational way that has never been the case, but of course it makes it difficult, and we see conflicts and crises flaring up. The recent example of the gas price crisis in Moldova is very telling, because it just happened at the beginning of the fall or winter season, and of course it came with a lot of consequences and huge cost for the country that is not in a great economic condition. We managed to help them overcome it for now, but it's not over yet. And of course, there's a number of frozen conflicts, as they are sometimes called, although this name is not entirely appropriate, whether it's Transnistria or South Ossetia or Abkhazia, or now the situation at the eastern Ukrainian border. So it adds to the tension, and it's not helpful.
Of course, Belarus perhaps is, as you mentioned at the beginning, couldn't be farther afield from any relationship with the European Union. But I would be amiss if I didn't take the opportunity to pick your brain a bit on the situation there. Again, it's a challenge with many dimensions, multifaceted, as you mentioned earlier. And I was wondering, how is the situation currently, both with regards to the authoritarian regime there and the illegitimate election results from last year, but also in the context of the current border crisis? How is that shifting the dynamic in terms of the role that the European Union is playing in the wider neighborhood?
Well, the policy on Belarus is very clear, and actually, after the rigged elections of 2020, the EU never recognized the election. The EU never recognized Mr. Lukashenko as legitimate president of the country. We have mobilized a lot of support for the democratic forces, the opposition in Belarus and in exile. So we maintain very close relationship with different opposition groups, led by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Pavel Letushka, and others. And in spring, we put forward an economic plan, a specific economic plan for future democratic Belarus, offering up to 3 billion euros in grants and loans for the development of the country once economic transition has taken place. Because for the time being, the policy is that we do not maintain any relationship with the regime. We stopped all financial cooperation with the regime. We redirected all of our programs to support victims of oppression, civil society, free media, not many left, but still, education and independent education initiatives, youth, and small and medium-sized enterprises, as long as we don't have to work with government institutions. So that's the situation for the time being. Now, the recent weeks we have seen a lot of tension at the border between Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. It started in Lithuania. Now the focus is more on Poland, and we know that the regime is fully behind it. The regime has facilitated travel of people from the Middle East and even further afield to Belarus, and facilitated basically bringing them to the border and encouraging them to cross into the European Union. It was not only the Polish government. Everybody sees it as a form of hybrid warfare. So the regime is doing that to destabilize the situation in the European Union and in a way punish the EU for the sanctions imposed on Belarus. You may remember that there has already been 5 packages of sanctions. The last one discussed and agreed upon by the EU foreign ministers a week ago, quite far-reaching. And actually, the EU has shown a remarkable level of unity in deciding on those measures, which is never easy, as we know.
Yes, indeed. And again, if you have just a few more minutes, and you have been very generous with your time and with your answers, but if I may conclude our discussion with what's going on at the border at the moment, in many ways it's a humanitarian crisis similar to the one we saw in the recent past in the Mediterranean, and there, do you think there are parallels between what's happening, and do you think that between the situation in the border with Belarus and the situation in the Mediterranean, and are there lessons that authoritarian leaders like Lukashenko draw from previous cases that we experienced at the borders of the European Union?
Look, now many analysts have referred to the current situation as weaponization of migration. It's, by the way, not a new phenomenon. I mean, there is evidence of that happening in the past in many countries in the world, in Africa, in Asia, elsewhere, where huge movement of population was used to put pressure on a certain country or a certain region. There are also differences between the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean region, so the situation between, let's say, Turkey and Greece, for instance, and what's happening in Belarus. Of course, the role of the government is one, but also the presence of migrants or refugees in Turkey is due to the situation in Syria, whereas so they came to Turkey to save their lives, and they were received rather generously by the Turkish authorities and the Turkish people. Whereas in the case of Belarus, you saw a clear policy of the regime facilitating travel of migrants, not refugees, in order to bring them into the European Union for purely disruptive reasons. But indeed, this weaponization of migration is a worrying trend that may happen in other regions as well, and it's very much on everybody's mind.
We are unfortunately running out of time. This has been an extremely interesting and very informative conversation, and both us and all our friends and viewers around Europe appreciate your candor with answering some of our questions. I would just like to thank you for taking the time, and hope this will be the first of many conversations on this and many other subjects.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And of course, I'd like to thank all of you, our viewers, for joining us again today for the 10th Talking Europe discussion. There are many more to come, so please stay tuned. Follow our website, europeanmovement.eu, and our social media for more updates. But in the meantime, have a good week and a nice evening. Thank you for joining us.